Well, today I can tell you guys are jealous of what I'm working on. This is a 2008 Chrysler Town & Country Signature Series. I'm going to be doing front struts, rear shock absorbers, spark plugs, and an alternator. This is all preventative maintenance except for the front struts, which are leaking on this vehicle. The rear shocks, oh pardon me, 108,000 miles, so they're ready to go anyway. But up here, you can see some moisture around the shock body. That means that the seal has failed, at least partially, and it's allowing fluid past it, which is no good. The rear shock absorbers on this car, other than being extremely rusted, here, hold on a second, I'll turn the light on. Other than being extremely rusted, have not been leaking, but really it makes sense to change them out. They're inexpensive, they're easy to do. Beyond that, I actually had intended to do front brake pads because they're about half thickness, but for whatever reason my parts order was missing it. So I may still go to a parts store yet and get some of those. And then spark plugs and alternator are topside. I'm going to be starting with springs, or sorry, not springs, struts and shocks. First order of business is going to be taking off the front wheels. I've never worked on this van, but it looks like these are probably 17 millimeter. It's pretty standard, so that's what I'm going to grab. Zip them off, take a look at everything, and I'll show you guys how we take out the strut upright assemblies. Typically, a front strut, one of these two, is sold without the top mount, the bump stop, the dust boot, and spring pads, but this is what's called a quick strut, which is pretty commonly available for most mass market vehicles sold with a McPherson strut assembly. These are actually interchangeable side to side because they have eyes on both edges for a sway bar end link, which I'll show you. It's actually pretty clever. I'm sure this saves cost. In a situation like this, the shock absorber to buy on its own is actually cheaper than buying the quick strut, which makes sense. There's a lot more hardware here, but there's a lot of reasons to do a quick strut, and I'm actually a huge fan of these, even though they're, some would say, a little bit wasteful because you're throwing away springs and top mounts after you're done with the old ones. But in a situation, especially in a shop environment, even with me, you're usually saving the cost difference in the labor. So for me to throw in a pair of quick struts, it's maybe an hour, whereas if I have to take out the original strut spring assemblies, use my spring compressor, which is in that middle box there, clamp the spring down, which is dangerous, take off the top nut, I may end up with a bad strut mount, which even if I have to replace that one part, it will add up to the cost of this inexpensive quick strut. Also, after 100,000 miles, springs settle a little bit. The coil springs in that van, even though they look perfectly fine, other than a little bit of surface rust, they are actually going to be slightly shorter and not do their job quite as effectively as a brand new turned coil spring. So I would say switching these out, especially at 100,000 miles, if you got that long out of a pair of these, it's cheap insurance. So again, I highly recommend quick struts. I've never used this brand before, but again, I don't usually work on domestics. Yeah, I don't know. This is a Delco Remy alternator. It's just a remanufactured Denso, which is what I was after. I believe this is a 160 amp. Can't really remember, but the 3.8 liter van only had one output option, so that's what I got. I've got NGK single platinum spark plugs. That's my favorite plug. People go iridium. That's certainly fine if you want to set it and forget it. These are good for about 60,000 miles of use. Coppers are good for 20 to 30,000. Iridiums are good for 100,000. But the thing nobody tells you is the actual conductivity, or the spark, is best with a copper plug, even though it wears out much faster. And it's actually slightly better with the silver plug, which they don't make anymore. But platinum is kind of in between there. So platinum is going to give you as good a spark as a copper plug with a little over half the longevity of an iridium. The iridium plugs last forever, but the spark they produce is not as good, in my opinion, as a single platinum spark plug. Plus these are half or a third the cost, so that's my spark plug of choice. That's my thought process and why I bought what I did for this van. Again, brake pads is something I purchased, but apparently, I don't know, maybe they're out of stock and I didn't get the email in time. For those, typically you got two options. You have ceramic brake pads and you have semi-metallic brake pads. Original equipment on this van was probably semi-metallic. More and more modern vehicles are going to a ceramic base pad. The reason why they do that is because it keeps your wheels cleaner. You see cars going down the road all the time with black wheels, or worse yet, brown. Black is due to brake dust, which you get a lot of on semi-metallic pads, but the dust means they're working. So the initial bite with the brake pedal is way better on semi-metallic pads. They hold up better under repeated heavy use. They don't last quite as long, and they're usually substantially cheaper, but again, now that ceramic pads are such mass market things, the cost is negligible. So on most daily driven vehicles, really, it doesn't matter. If you want to go ceramics to not clean your wheels quite as often, go for it. But my preference is semi-metallic still, because they offer you that better performance. And honestly, most of the time when you get in a collision, it's only by 3 or 4 feet, and I think those semi-metallic pads will make up that difference for sure. But yeah, anyway, that's enough of me babbling and digressing. I'm going to rip the wheels off of this and let's take a look underneath. So wheel nuts were actually 19 millimeter. I know I said 17, but I didn't really know. These brake pads, they're probably still 75 or 70%, maybe a little under. So I really don't need to do those. They're actually labeled January 2016. The sway bar end link, sway bar end link is an 18 millimeter. There's also usually a notch on the back of it for a wrench, just to kind of hold the stud still. On this one, there's actually a Torx slot in the middle as well, so you can use a hand wrench, but we don't have time for that. We're gonna use power tools. So, I pop that on there, get my handy dandy 1/2 inch impact, grab the back of that with a wrench. Once I find the notch, zip that off, just set that aside, and then moving on to these, which I believe are 21 millimeter, 22 fits, so that's what I'm gonna use. Then on this side, there's a 10 millimeter holding this bracket onto the strut assembly. Once all of those are out, it will detach the knuckle from the strut. So this is gonna hang, this whole thing is gonna hang, and we'll be able to get the top mounts out at that point. But I'm gonna do this side, and I'll show you. I'm gonna do the other side, and I won't show you that one because it's the same process. And then we'll go up top, and I'll kind of show you what's up there. So there we have it. Bolts are zipped out, little bracket bolts off. Now I just have the top mount. So I'm gonna move my little jack out of the way here, and show you the top mounts. So I have the other side all unbolted. Up top, we're gonna do the cowl piece, which looks like 2 Phillips screws, and then 2 15 millimeter bolts on your wiper arms. Be careful to take note of the exact location of the wipers, because you will have to put both blades on and tighten them down in the correct spot. So I've got them both out. Old and busted. New hotness. This one's actually got some sweet water built up in it, so yep, out with the old leaky struts and with the brand new shiny stuff. Take off this label here. Just warning you not to basically loosen the nut on the top of it. Suppose I'll probably just leave that on there because this one's getting leakage in it anyway. So take off the nuts and use the new ones, obviously, but in order to put it in the van, you have to take those off. And then we're gonna have to figure out if there's a special alignment, which it does not look like. Sometimes the triangle is not perfectly equilateral. Sometimes it's isosceles or a scalene. Sorry, look at those geometry terms. So I'm just gonna pop these right up on in there, hand thread the nuts, and then we're gonna torque them down to, I think they're 19 foot-pounds, something like that. It's not very much. And I'm actually gonna put some Loctite on my threads before I do that. So there we have the new strut in place. I lifted up the brake disc with the insides of my thighs. Just press the bolts right in and then give them a tap with a hammer to seat the threads in. Next up is going to be putting that 10mm back on to hold the ABS sensor bracket. Popping those 21mm nuts back on with your impact. Those are probably 80 foot-pounds. This little one just snug as cool. The end link, if yours are anywhere near as nasty as mine, just give it a couple ugga-duggas with your impact and it should be fine. These you can hammer on pretty well and they don't seem to mind. I had to use a couple 100 foot-pounds to get this one off because it was so corroded, so don't worry too much about it. Same process on the other side. Next up, I'm gonna do the rear shocks, so stay tuned on that one. There, she's all buttoned up. Moving on to the back. There is not much to the shock absorbers on these cars. There's a single upper bolt and a lower bolt with nut. I'm gonna assume this is probably an 18mm on both sides. And then, ooh, I guess it is a nut up there as well. So I'm gonna grab an 18, see if that's right. If it's not, adjust the sockets accordingly and then rip these bad boys out. They are pretty gross. Wow, I hope yours were not as rusted as these. I've got a very good 1/2-inch Milwaukee impact rated at, I don't know, 500-600 foot-pounds with a full battery, and I could just barely get these out with how much corrosion was in there. So I got them, all four. None of them broke, but these bolts are pretty iffy looking. Wow. I kind of wish I had new ones to replace them. These are really disgusting. Yeah, these old shocks, man. The compression's still actually okay. But the rebound, even on its side, basically nothing. Pardon, bear with me. So shocks should rebound. Like that. So the old ones were pretty dead even though they weren't leaking. So the internal valving probably wasn't in great shape. But to pop these up, it's really simple. Get the big end facing up, align that, slide your bolt through, get your nut on the back, torque it down, and then use probably a floor jack and align the lower hole, get your bolt through the other side here, put the nut on the back and torque it down. That's all there is to shocks on one of these. It's very, very simple.